So today we have Chris Sullivan, who's here from University of Cincinnati, and he's going to talk a little bit about his early career and what it's like to be an academic over in Cincinnati in the United States.
Great. The first kind of theme or question that was posed to me in preparation for this was the question of how I got into academia. Basically there's kind of the planned piece of that, and then sort of the more serendipitous or luck piece of it, which is that I started out as a criminal justice undergraduate student, but more thinking about going into practice and going into the field either first as kind of law enforcement, and then later potentially being a lawyer and going into law school. However, when I finished my bachelor's degree, I was asked quickly after that if I wanted to be a graduate assistant in the program from which I graduated in Massachusetts in the U.S. And I took that opportunity and ultimately began to really like doing research and writing and working with the professors that I had in that program, and ultimately just went on to get a PhD later on. And as I became more interested in data collection and management and analysis, that really took hold, and it was clear that that's what I wanted to do, was to go into academia. And then in terms of, let me talk a little bit about my current role. So I'm an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati, and basically that entails teaching a lot of graduate courses, but then also some undergraduate courses, working with different graduate students on their own projects, and then also having them work with me on a few funded studies that we have to look at different issues in the juvenile justice system in the United States. So that's part of my role. Another part of my role is to actually coordinate our graduate program, which would be called PostGrad study here in Australia. And basically that entails doing a lot of coordination work, making sure that students are on track and doing some advising, ensuring that sort of policies and procedures are looked at as far as the steps that students have to go through to get their degree. So that sort of is a catch-all, and really gives me exposure to all of the graduate students. In my teaching capacity, I teach a couple of different courses, but mainly some data analysis courses, and then also some seminars, smaller courses in developmental and life course criminology and juvenile justice. So those are my main areas of focus, and sort of my day-to-day work is a little bit of everything. It tends to be perhaps dealing with a student issue or dealing with something that has to happen in order for the program to move forward, or some standard task that needs to get done at a particular time of the year, like doing admissions, screening applications, and leading a committee to decide who comes into our graduate program. But then also doing my own work, as I mentioned, and supervising students as well. The general type of research that I do is mainly quantitative in nature, but I do have in the funded studies that I lead, we have components that are both qualitative, so going out and doing some interviewing and observations of people in the juvenile justice system, and then doing record-based analysis and some surveys of youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system. So that's one key area is the juvenile justice emphasis, and then also developmental and life course criminology, which really has to do with looking at patterns and trends of delinquent and criminal behavior over time, and then also trying to help students and colleagues wherever I can if there's roles that I can play in their work as well.
What do you see as the differences between especially how we do research around juveniles and delinquency, or the impact that it has between the court systems are completely different, obviously, with Australia and US?
That's a good question. I think that there are probably some differences and similarities. I'll preface this by saying that I haven't necessarily done a full scope study of what happens over here in juvenile justice. But one of the things that is pretty striking to me is At the moment, we're just completing a study of disproportionate minority contact with the juvenile justice system in the U.S., and there's a lot of parallels in terms of those issues there in the States, and also sort of the issue of Aboriginal youth and their contact with the system here. So to the extent that I've done reading on the system in Australia, it's been more along those lines and trying to think about, is there anything that's happening here that could be imported there? And I think some of the case conferencing approaches and that sort of thing could be valuable to what we do, and bringing that into some of the practitioners that we tend to work with around this problem. Yeah. So I think there's similarities, but also probably some differences in how the way things proceed. Yeah.
You were saying also that when you first started your undergraduate degree, that you thought you would go into policing, which most of our students basically would think the same when they come into criminology. What do you think made the difference for you? Was it being exposed to lots of different research and topics, or a particular academic that you met along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that all of those things actually, and one of the questions I had here was how I prepared myself as an undergraduate for postgraduate study, and I think to me it became clear at some point, maybe my second or third year at the university, that I really like to write. I liked the research part of things. I liked sort of looking into a problem and going forward and trying to find as much information as I could on it, even if I couldn't fully resolve it in that paper or in that project that we were working on for class. So I think that there gradually became a realization that probably the better course was something that was more allowed me to analyze some of the problems as opposed to kind of be frontline. Some of it was probably personality as well. I'm not sure that I would have been a great police officer in retrospect. But so there was that piece of it, and then there was the part of getting encouragement from certain professors along the way, and especially I think once I started graduate school and really got through it, where I really started to be able to work with a few faculty members, and that was really what kind of lit the fire ultimately. So I was able then to sort of not only kind of get a sense of what they do on a day-to-day basis, but also get a feel for how they were and how they approach questions and problems, and sort of the academic. The academic way of life in some ways is to me became really, really desirable at that stage. Yeah. And
do you find now when you see students who you can see yourself in them, and did that get you excited to go, well, I can actually direct them into research and see them flourish? Yeah, to an extent. I think that's a good question. I don't know if it's so much that I see myself in them as it is. You can see, some students who just have kind of a natural sense of curiosity. They want to get to the bottom of something, or they have a really, real interest and passion in some particular problem, and they're willing to work at it. I think that those students I quickly will gravitate to, because, and I think all of us who do this a lot of times are looking for those types of students who are self-motivated and really want to work as hard on something as they possibly can. One of the things that we tend to look at in some of the courses. So for example, we have a beginning in our postgraduate program, we have a beginning statistics course, and sometimes it's not even as much about them getting the right answer on a particular problem set as it is, are they willing to kind of work through the process? Are they willing to do the work with a particular data set to try to resolve issues, those types of things? And those types of students, I do think you tend to gravitate towards. So. Well, obviously, for our audience today, these are our ACES students, so they have the capability to go on and do great things. So it's nice for them to know that bit of passion and seeing where where that can take you in career path and everything is pretty essential to them.
Yeah, and I
So
think
very interesting.
I think that the other thing too is a lot of times that that carries the day far more than what we see on test scores and things like that. I mentioned sort of being the role as kind of the graduate program coordinator, director. So I see all the applications that come through, and I can kind of over a few years start to compare, well, what did the students' test scores look like, or what did their application look like coming into the door versus where they are now. And what you see a lot of times is that some of the better students don't necessarily break the curve at the top end, but they really do have that passion and that desire to really work at learning, getting their degree, and that sort of thing. So.
Do you think that taking on either RA work or volunteering for things with academics, that would make a big difference and make a big difference to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the themes here is the entrance requirements for postgraduate study in our field. And obviously I only know our program, but I know our requirements pretty well and what we look at. And, so there are things like writing samples and letters of recommendation in terms of what the people you've worked with so far are saying about you. But really one of the things we really are pretty keen on at this point is, do you have some research experience? We have awful lot of students who come in and think this is really what I want to do. I want to get a PhD. I want to go on and go into academia. But really, in some ways, if they don't necessarily have that experience, it's hard to know. Do they like the challenges of doing research sometimes? Have they had some exposure and building some skills, not just through the classroom work, but also through kind of actually hands-on, where the challenges often come up, more so than they do on, reading the textbook.
So you're
I would recommend that, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes them a better, well-rounded student, and the experience, of course, then is better for them.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so, and I think the nice thing that I see in our students that have more extensive research experience coming in is, and again, this is somewhat anecdotal, but they seem to be able to make a little bit more of the connection between the classroom and then actually doing that work, or working with a faculty member outside of the classroom environment. Because a lot of times what happens is, students are trained just to go to class and do their studying, and they might do very well for a period of time, but in postgraduate work, sometimes it really becomes a matter of a lot of the most important things are going to happen outside of the classroom, certainly, in terms of building that relationship with a particular advisor or mentor, and maybe collaborating even with other students on projects or doing reading groups or things like that. So, yeah.
That's good to hear, actually, because this is the kind of stuff that we tell our students that it's important. So it's good to actually hear somebody who's not only has done it themselves, but teaching their new postgraduates how.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, we really shy away from taking anyone, especially for our doctoral program, if they don't have some research experience, either at the undergraduate level, or if they're coming in sort of with already having kind of a postgraduate degree at that level. We've really found that if they have that, they tend to do better, and that sort of controls for all of the scores and past GPAs and all of that stuff. We find that research experience makes a difference, particularly if they sort of are leading and have some interest in particular areas and themes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good. When obviously some of our students may be interested in studying overseas, would it be possible that some of our students, if they wanted to go on and do postgraduate studies within your university, how would they go about that? Do you take a lot from international?
We do. So absolutely. I think we welcome all the applicants we can get. No, we absolutely do, and especially for me. For me, having been here for a couple of months now, this would be a prime place where we'd like to get some students from, I'm sure. But yeah, we do take international students, and I think one thing that's important, just from the standpoint of kind of the practicalities of it, Obviously, there are sort of different costs in going overseas to for education, things like that. But we fund our international students the same exact way as we do our students who are from the U.S. So that's not an issue at all. But we tend to we try to encourage as much as many applications for as many places as we possibly can. We have a couple of pockets, I would say, of pipelines where we tend to have some international students from. We have probably at this point a half dozen students from South Korea, and then we probably have, although it's fewer now, but over the last several years we've had some students from Turkey that have appeared regularly, and then beyond that we tend to have a few European students, some students from South America and Central America. And that's probably those are the main groups. But yeah, absolutely. I think that I guess if you're watching this, I'd be happy to talk some more with anyone who's interested about that. Right, for sure.
So is it because you can see that what they're being taught out here, what we're researching, that then feeds into what your university is doing?
I think so. I think that there are some theme areas that are here that we also do, particularly a couple of those students who are interested in kind of environmental criminology and criminal analysis of criminal events. We have some people who do that. I mentioned development on life course research. We have probably 3 or 4 of us who do that type of work as well.
Would they be expected to just cold contact academics? Do they have to have a supervisor and a title in mind and all that sort of stuff before they would come into your postgraduate program?
Not as much. We have so this is where there's some differences between the U.S. postgrad system, I think, and the system here in Australia and even other parts of the world like Europe. So we tend to have a layer of coursework at first, and then supervision. So if they don't come in with I absolutely want to do this, and I absolutely want to work with this individual person, it's not that problematic. It's more something that we'll develop. Now, we like to have we at least like to be able to say, all right, they're interested in this particular theme. We have someone or a couple of people who do that kind of work. So we do that preliminary check, but in terms of being paired up with a mentor coming in, that varies quite a bit. Some students we have, it is pretty clear. Other students, it evolves a little bit. Yeah.
That's good to know, because that's certainly different from...
It is, yeah.
Chris, you mentioned the coursework over at your university in the United States, which is pretty similar, I would guess, to most larger universities in the United States. And it's going to be a little different than the postgraduate work here in Australia, which generally is not oriented towards coursework. I guess you already know that, and maybe you can describe for our students who are almost all going to be Australian.
Right.
What exactly, or give us a little bit of find at some schools internationally, like over in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. So our program consists of a few different parts. A couple of parts are what I would call extracurricular, so those might entail doing a comprehensive exam in a particular research area. We have a statistics and research methods proficiency paper process that all of our students go through.
That's at what point?
At the end of the first year. And we have, in the curriculum, we have a few different types of classes. We have core classes, which are basic general seminars and research methods and statistics courses. So there's about 4 or 5 courses there. And then we have seminars that would basically be small classes where students are interacting with the faculty around particular themes. And one of the advantages of our program in terms of the coursework is we tend to have 3 or 4 people in each of the areas. So for example, if you were interested in studying something like crime prevention, you would be able to take 3 or 4 courses that are really dedicated to that topic. along with the writing that goes with that. So you'd have some experience writing on those topics, probably doing some research on those topics in the span of your coursework. And then you'd also be connected with 3 or 4 faculty who do work in that area by virtue of that coursework. So we have about a period of time that's going to be more independent study at the end of a student's time with us, and that's going to entail writing their doctoral thesis and that sort of thing. And then we also have, at the front end of the process, a series of courses that they would take, both in terms of core classes, things that are basic, like research methods and statistics, and then basic seminars, and then they would have some time to take courses in their specific area.
So, just to elaborate a little bit, be a little bit more detailed for most of our students who probably only see the Australian system. If somebody wanted to apply to a university like the one you're at right now, am I correct that they would generally do 4 years of undergraduate study, get an undergraduate degree, apply to your postgraduate course,
Right.
which is often called graduate study.
Right.
And at your university, they would get a master's degree first?
Yeah, that would be part of the process generally. Okay. That would happen either on the way to getting the PhD, or we do have some students who we take in who already have the master's degree and then just do the PhD and doctoral coursework from there.
So when you say coursework, how many years of coursework would they take as postgraduates or as graduates?
Usually about 2. It depends somewhat on what they're coming in with, whether or not they already have a master's degree, that sort of thing. But it varies anywhere from about 2 to 2.5 or so.
So they would take coursework pretty much through the first 2 years to get a master's. Takes how long?
The master's in our program would actually be 1 year.
Oh, 1 year.
Yeah, so we have a 1-year master's
So
program.
they do coursework right through the master's and then also into the PhD.
Yeah, and a lot of that is overlapping. So, probably about 50% of that would overlap between the master's coursework and the PhD
so
coursework.
the students who are working for their master's degrees are in the same classes with the students with the PhD.
Yes, with some exceptions of some upper level seminars that we have, and then also our statistics and research methods courses are very specific to the doctoral students.
Yeah. And then they could choose their own coursework to a certain degree, at least these seminars that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So the students basically select from one of 5 tracks or areas: crime prevention, criminology, corrections, administration, criminal justice, and I always forget one, and a law enforcement kind of track. So we have those, or policing. We have those 5 areas where our students tend to concentrate, and we've more so my predecessors and the program have built the program entirely around those areas. Mm-hmm. So we have a few people teaching courses in each of them.
So all of the students who are coming in after an undergraduate would take a core series of courses, statistics, research methods, and then choose from one of those 5 different areas.
Exactly.
And then the ones that have the same area, I think you said often 3 different courses in that one concentration alone.
Exactly.
And those are the ones you're calling the seminar.
Yeah, those would be smaller courses.
And they would usually get a master's degree after about a year, after they take these comprehensive examinations. And then if they scored well enough, they would be invited to go further for the PhD.
Yeah, they move forward into what we would call doctoral candidacy, and then at that stage they're really starting to work with a mentor or team of mentors to do their dissertation project.
But most of them are still taking some coursework after that first year and into the 2.5 year period.
Yeah. Usually it's about 2 years for
2 years.
our doctoral students. Yeah. It varies a little bit whether they come in with or without a master's.
So how long does it take the average student who is getting out of undergrad to actually finish it?
It's usually about 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Our program, I would say our program could be divided roughly into year-long periods first couple of years are mainly coursework, but a couple of those required exams happen there, or one of those required exams at least. Then we have a year in which they would probably prepare for and take their comprehensive exam, and then most of our students tend to do their thesis project in roughly a year. But that's where you get into more variation about how long they take, what else they might be working on. Some students who are working on funded research projects may take longer because they're maybe they take on pretty prominent roles in those studies. So,
and in order to apply for your program, what tests or documents and so forth would a student need?
Yeah, the main standardized test we use is the graduate record exam. So the GRE exam, we have that. All of our students take that, and then we usually require a writing sample, a statement of their interest that kind of ties what they would like to do, both in terms of the area of study they would like to focus on, and then also kind of what they're, why are they applying, how do they see their fit at the University of Cincinnati. Grade point average, we tend to put a good amount of weight on how they've done in the past, but also we look at letters of recommendation as well. And we tend to be, our admissions process tends to be a little bit more of what is sometimes referred to now as a holistic review. So we don't tend to screen simply on GRE scores, for example. We have an average in mind, and we do kind of work from that benchmark. But we also will look, for example, if a student maybe didn't do well on one section, we might look at their coursework that might be pertinent to that section as well, and see, oh wow, they didn't do well in this quantitative GRE component here, but all of their statistics courses they really did well on as undergrads, and that we would look at as sort of an offset. Or maybe they worked on a project as a student, as an RA, a volunteer RA, who, and then the person that they worked with, the staff member that they worked with, says, "Wow, this person was fantastic on my study." So we look for those offsets in the application and try to make sure that we're getting a full view. We don't really have kind of we have some average scores, but we don't necessarily have a cutoff per se.
So you mentioned the importance of this GRE, your graduate record examination in the United States.
Yeah.
And you said something at one point about a component. Maybe you can explain for our students, is there just one component, or are there two components? What do they ask you here? Are they asking questions about mathematics or statistics, or are they asking questions about serial killers, or are they asking something else about criminal justice and so forth?
Yeah, so this is actually a general exam that most areas of study, or at least a good number of them, would actually use this exam as kind of a tool in their decision-making process. But it comprises three components: the quantitative reasoning, the verbal reasoning, and then there's an analytic writing component as well that's graded a little bit differently in terms of the scoring. They've changed the process relatively recently, but the quantitative reasoning consists of a lot of logic type questions. It's not necessarily going to be based on content knowledge, so some of the things that are taught specifically in courses, those aren't necessarily going to be as relevant as a sort of general ability to reason through logical problems on the quantitative reasoning section. Things like reading comprehension on the verbal reasoning questions, those types of things. So those sections break down into two equally weighted components, the verbal and the quantitative, and then the third component, that analytic writing, is scored a bit differently. Do you use that here?
The GREs?
Yeah.
They don't really have the equivalent here, not that I'm aware of. They have a score going into undergrad that would be
placement
kind of
type score,
roughly equivalent in one sense.
Uh-huh.
But if somebody did want to study overseas, particularly in the United States, they would have to take one of these tests, even if they were from a foreign country.
Yeah, they do.
And maybe you could say a little bit about the scoring of the test. Is there a minimum and a maximum, and what are the averages for these tests that for your brand new postgraduate or graduate students?
That's a great
to get accepted.
That's a great question. They've changed the scoring recently. You may know this already.
Well, I probably don't know
No.
about the scoring. I only know about it from when I took it.
Yeah. So it was scored on I think it was scored on a 14 or 1600 scale then, probably, when I took it as well. But now it's on somewhere around a 300 type scale. At least that's about the average.
Completely different.
That's what the average we see. Yeah.
Scale,
So yeah. So basically, it's about. I don't know what the maximum is. That's the issue. But it averages. I believe the 50th percentiles are somewhere around 150 and 150 on each section. So a total would be about 300. Our average scores tend to be a little bit higher than that, but are mainly right around that average for the most part in our graduate student cohorts. But it's really scored. It's scored both in terms of a raw score, but then it's also scored on a percentile basis. So essentially, you'll get a numeric value out of whatever the base is, whether that's 340 or something like that. But you'll also get a sense of the percentile rank where you stood relative to all of the other test takers as well. So that's really where it tends to be a little bit more. It can be standardized a little bit more easily across test takers.
And so students who would be applying to your program, if I understand correctly, would be taking the exact same test as students who would be applying for postgraduate work in mathematics or biology or almost any field at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, most fields. So like medical schools, they have their own exam. I think business schools have their own standardized exam. But for the most part, a lot of the different fields that have graduate programs would use this same exam. So you get a sense of why it can be a variable in the process, but we can't give it so much weight in terms of our thinking, because it doesn't necessarily capture all of the things that we'd want to know about our applicants.
Hearing, it sounds like if a student wants to think about overseas study in the United States, that they should be thinking about the idea that they're going to take this test, which is an extremely large component of their application process. That's a very generalized test.
Yeah, it is a generalized test. Yeah.
Isn't directed towards knowledge specifically in the field.
Right.
But would it be fair to summarize it as saying it basically measures critical thinking skills along different dimensions?
Yeah, I think so. Ability to reason through problems as well. Yeah, I think that would probably be a good, summation of the general gist of the exam. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but it's. For us, I would just kind of reiterate. It is really one piece of the puzzle because, and especially when we're looking at international students, I haven't looked at the questions in a long time specifically, but it could be very sort of U.S. centric. I have no idea exactly what the
So if a student came to you who was in their first or second or third year of university study and asked you, what should I do right now if I want to get into a postgraduate or graduate program at University of Cincinnati? What should I do? Yeah. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think for one, I would say that it's going to be important for them to do well in their general coursework, because that's obviously going to show up in whatever the grade point average is going to be. So that's an important performance indicator. I think especially if they want to go on and get a doctoral degree in particular, we're definitely looking to see, do they have the track record of performing well throughout their academic career. The other two things I would say getting involved with the research process, and they're somewhat linked actually, the two things I would say. So volunteering as an RA or being involved in studies with the staff here at Griffith would be one important thing, and that's linked to the second one, which is that the letters of recommendation invariably that you get by virtue of actually getting involved with the process or being someone who's heavily involved in answering questions in class and so forth are going to be qualitatively different than what you would get if you're just someone even who scores high but isn't necessarily noticed outside of that. I think it's important to sort of develop those connections, because those are those are things that we look at when we consider applications. We may look at, oh wow, look at this letter that they received from this, this great, researcher scholar that we actually, we know and trust their opinion. So I think that those two things are really important as far as what I would suggest they do, even if it's just slowly over the course of their time in their studies.
Obviously, we have some ACES students who are external, so they don't have that face-to-face contact with their professors. They would certainly get to know them along the way during their courses, and they could certainly show that GPA was good. Mm-hmm. How else do you think they might connect into your postgraduate program?
When you say external, do you mean they're online? Yeah.
Yes.
No, absolutely. I think. Yeah, that's a good question. That one can be a little bit challenging. We actually deal with this a little bit. I don't obviously know all the inner workings of things here, but I've had some success taking. So we do have our distance learning program, online program, a master's program. So occasionally I do get students who will ask me about going into the PhD program, and one of the things I always tell them is, even remotely now, I mean, you can do so much via email and Skype or FaceTime or whatever, to at least put themselves out there and try to say, hey, are you working on something that I might be interested in? And a lot of times I've found, at least at our program, that the faculty are pretty receptive to a little extra sort of free help, especially, even if it's a relatively kind of limited or narrow scope. So, I think trying to get them involved in that, we try to use as much of the technological tools to kind of, hold, office hours online and things like that, so that they can at least have that, maybe some connection or even if it's remote, some FaceTime with the professors. I mean, a big part of it actually, and it's interesting, before looking at all of the applications that I've looked at, I think this is my third year leading our process of screening and selection for our graduate programs, postgraduate programs. The thing that's striking to me is you can almost tell on paper the students that put themselves out there, that show the initiative, versus those who might do reasonably well with things but don't really, ever kind of get to that point where they're really engaged with things. And what we've seen, at least, is that those students tend to struggle when they get to us, even if they have good test scores and some good track record behind them. So, even to show the initiative to work on something, or, even if they have some idea of their own to go present somewhere. I don't know exactly what the opportunities for undergraduate research are here, but I know that occasionally we'll have conferences where it's just solely undergraduate research presentations or posters of their work and that sort of thing. So even those types of things, I think, go a long way.
Oh, that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're probably running out of time soon. Do you have any final things that would be interesting for our students, or should we just see if there's any other questions?
I think we can just see if there's any other questions.
So do we have any other questions
Well,
from our audience?
I don't have any at the moment.
Well, I think you've answered the ones that we could come up with. So thanks very much for
Thanks for your time.
your time today.
No problem.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
all. No,
Thank you.
no problem.